welcome to the Master Gardener series. My name is Sarah Haig. Today our special guest is Lois Chatham, a certified Master Gardener. Master Gardeners are specially trained volunteers who provide research-based education to the public under the guidance of North Carolina State University Extension Service. Today, Lois, we're going to be talking about how to garden when deer are in the area, and I'm very interested in that topic. I live in South Nags Head, and I often see deer even walking across the footbridge, and I wonder how gardeners manage when there are deer around. How did you become interested in this topic?
Well, that's very interesting, Sarah. I'm glad you asked. Actually, quite a few years ago when I first moved into the area, there was absolutely no vegetation on my lot. It was a new construction, and I was not aware that we had deer in the area. So when I talked with my landscaper, I mentioned to him that I lived close to the ocean and I needed plants that would stand up to the wind and the salt spray and the drought. And the plants that he suggested did that very well. However, by the end of the winter, the only plant that I had left was my Hollywood juniper. The deer had eaten my pittosporum, the euonymus, the Indian hawthorn, and I thought to myself, I need to find out what they don't like because I don't want to continue to throw my money away. And that's one of the reasons I became a Master Gardener volunteer and to learn more about the deer.
Yeah, wow, what a story. How do homeowners know if deer are in the area?
Well, there are a lot of different signs that you might see that there are deer. Actually, as you're walking on the beach, you might see signs of the deer on the beach because they go down on the beach to eat the sea oats that grow along the dunes. You also might see signs of deer damage in your yard on the trees. The male deer shed their antlers each year and grow larger ones that are covered in velvet, and they can severely damage your trees when they are rubbing that velvet off. You can see by this picture the bark that is stripped from this tree, and it was surprising to me that they even used these young junipers and stripped the vegetation right out of the center.
Yeah, well, seeing this tree makes me realize what happened to my little loblolly pine. We planted one in our yard and it looked just like that photo one day, and the poor tree didn't make it.
Oh, that's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that. The deer cause a lot of damage to ornamentals, vegetables, and trees. Deer are browsers, and they like to amble when they eat, so they are going to taste just about anything along their path. Are you aware that they can eat up to 2 gallons or 16 pounds of vegetation at one feeding?
They must have huge stomachs.
I think so. They also lack upper incisors, which means that they are going to leave torn, jagged edges on your leaves. So that can be a sign that it's deer damage and not from rabbits or some other animal. One of the favorite plants of the deer is the lilies. And here's a before and after picture of an Asiatic lily, and you can see that they have really decimated this plant. They really like lilies. And even though they don't particularly like plants that have thorny stems, they have that ability to get in there and just nip that bud right off of the rosebuds just before they're getting ready to bloom. And if you have a shady garden, chances are you probably have a hosta. And you can see by this photo that the torn leaves, that the deer have been at this garden as well.
Would a plant that was damaged like that be likely to survive?
It will survive, but it will severely stunt the growth of it. So you're not going to see a whole lot of greenery on top. The roots will still survive.
Okay.
Deer also have the ability to reach a height of 6 feet. So you have to be concerned about trees. As you can see by this photo, arbor vitae is one of their favorites. They have trimmed all of these very nicely.
I see that. Wow. So what is a homeowner to do in the face of this sort of onslaught from deer?
There are a lot of things that the homeowner can do. One of the first things that comes to mind is perhaps using a fence to keep them out of your yard. But the deer have the ability to jump an 8-foot fence. So if you have a chain link fence, chances are they may jump over that. If they don't necessarily jump over something that they cannot see beyond, so we would probably recommend that you use tall, solid fence, and that should probably keep them out. Now, if you have an area, a small area that you are trying to keep the deer from, say perhaps you're trying to grow a few vegetables, or maybe to train them not to go into your flower garden, an inexpensive method might be what we call our fishing line fence. This is actually using the monofilament line that the fishermen use, and you would string it up 15 inches off the ground, another at 36 inches, and then a third one at 48 inches. And this means then that the deer can't bend down to eat underneath of it. Now, the theory behind that is the fact that the deer see very well off to the side so that they can watch for predators, but they don't necessarily see very well straight forward. So they bump into this fence and they become startled and confused, and then they leave. In fact, I did use this in my garden. I had an area of my garden that was a natural walking path for the deer. We have to remember that they were here before we were, and they had their normal paths that they used. And so I decided I needed to keep them out of this area because they kept nibbling on my plants. So I strung this fishing line fence up, and it took a little while before they started using another path, that I could see that they weren't trying to get into that area, but eventually they were conditioned to go a different route.
Oh, good.
So it can work, but it may take some time. It's not going to be an overnight fix. There are other methods that you might want to consider, some called frightening methods. But we have to remember that deer tend to come out at dawn, dusk, and in the middle of the night. So if you're using loud noises, it possibly is going to disturb you or your neighbors. In fact, I'd like to share an experience by one of my attendees at a program I gave several years ago. A gentleman said he had a lot of deer in his yard and he had such a problem. He saw an advertisement that said that this product was guaranteed to keep the deer away. So he decided, okay, I'm going to try it. So he bought it, set everything up, and he said that night about 3 o'clock in the morning, he was awakened by these alarms, and he got up and looked out the window, and the deer out there just nibbling away at his plants, oblivious to the fact that these alarms were going off. The only thing it did was wake him up. So he decided that, I guess this product is not going to work. There are some motion-activated ultrasonic noisemakers that use the high-frequency sounds that are inaudible to humans. So if you're planning on doing something of that nature, you might want to consider using those products. But keep in mind that it may or it may not work. There are also motion-activated flashing lights that could perhaps startle the deer. But oftentimes they become accustomed to these sounds and to the lights, and so it may work for a little while, but not necessarily for a long time. Now, if you have a fenced-in yard and you keep your dog out in the yard, that could be a deterrent because they may not come in the yard. Here's a picture of a dog that would probably be your ideal barking dog. Yeah. Now, if this is your dog, I'm not so sure that it's going to keep the deer out of your garden.
But it is a cute little dog there. What about repellents? Smelly sprays, hair, soap, that sort of thing?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Sarah. You know, the first thing that most homeowners think to do when they see that there's been some damage to their plants by the deer is to go to the store and buy a product that they can spray on it to keep the deer away. There are a lot of different repellents on the market, some very clever names, but the majority of these repellents are not to be used on plants that you are going to eat, such as vegetables or fruit. So you need to read the label to be sure that it is going to be safe for you if you are planning to spray plants that you are going to eat. Also, it can be very time-consuming and also costly in the long run, because some of the repellents do not weather well. Others dissipate when there's rainfall. So you're going to constantly have to treat your plants. And the other thing you need to remember is that when new growth comes in, you are going to need to treat that as well, because the deer have that ability to get in there and just eat that new growth and know that you haven't treated it yet. I don't know how they know that, but obviously they see it and come in and are able to do that. So again, it's something that's going to have to be done continuously. There are several home remedies that you may have heard of. As you mentioned, the hair or the soap. And the theory behind the hair is that human hair repels the deer, and you put that in mesh bags and hang it from your tree. However, studies have shown that this is not a very effective method, so I don't know that you would want to try to do that. The other home remedy that you mentioned was using soap, and studies have shown that it can be a very effective method. Any bar of soap will do as long as it's very fragrant. And you would drill a hole in the soap and put rope or string on it and hang it from your tree limbs about every 3 feet apart. So it will work, but I'm not sure how appealing it is to see soap hanging from your tree.
I wonder that myself. So, okay, well, repellents might help. I'm wondering if the answer might be the plants you select, and perhaps there are plants deer just won't eat.
There are plants that the deer do not particularly like. However, there is no such thing as a deer-proof plant. I wish there were, but there is not. They will eat just about anything if the food source is scarce. But there are plenty of plants out there that the deer do not particularly like. And we recommend that you do some research and use these plants, and that will discourage the deer from coming into your yard. Some characteristics of plants that the deer do not particularly like are those plants that have thorny stems or spiny leaves, such as this American holly, which is native to North Carolina. And it is an evergreen, has these little red berries that the birds like as well. Another example might be the pyracantha. Again, another plant with berries that the birds like to eat. And it has those very thorny stems, so you don't want to get up too close to that either. And one other example might be the century plant. You see this frequently on the Outer Banks because it does well in our environment with the heat and the poor soil. And I don't even like to get up close to this plant. It seems to reach out and grab you. Another plant that they don't particularly like are those that have strong fragrances or pungent tastes. And I found this very interesting because they don't like herbs. And I thought that since we eat herbs, for sure, the deer would eat them as well. Rosemary would just be one example of an herb. Some other herbs that I can think of right off are oregano, basil, thyme. And I'm sure that you have noticed when you brush up against them, it releases this fragrance. And that's what happens when the deer goes around and they smell that and they back away. So you might want to consider putting herbs at the front of your garden, and that may keep them out of your garden. If you're looking for ornamental plants, a good example of that might be the butterfly bush. They have these beautiful blooms that attract the butterflies in the summertime. And a tree that you might want to consider would be the southern magnolia, which also is native to southeastern United States, and it is an evergreen. Other plants that the deer tend to stay away from are those plants that are poisonous. I'm sure you've seen oleanders all up and down the beach because they do very well in our area. They withstand the wind and the salt spray and the poor soil, and the deer tend to stay away from them. All parts of this plant are poisonous to humans if it's ingested. In fact, it also, when you cut the leaves, it may have sap that if you get on your skin may cause a rash. So we recommend that you wear protective clothing if you're working around oleanders. A plant that you might want to consider for the wintertime would be the Lenten rose because it blooms in the late winter to early spring, gives some additional color to your garden. It is an evergreen, and all parts of this plant are poisonous as well if it's ingested.
Okay.
A plant that you might want to consider for the summertime would be lantana. Lantana does very well in this area. And there are a wide variety of lantana out there. The two hardy varieties that I am aware of that do very well in this area is Miss Huff, which is really the yellowy kind of bloom, and it grows to about 6 feet. Now, if you're looking for a plant that's a little shorter than that, you might want to consider the Moselle, because that only goes to about 3.5 to 4 feet, and that has the pinkish blooms. Now, the berries on this plant are poisonous if ingested, but the rest of the plant is not. Interesting enough, they also don't like plants that have fuzzy leaves. I guess they just don't like that texture. I know there are certain foods that I don't really care for the texture, and I guess that holds true for the deer as well. If lamb's ear is a great example of that. If you're looking for a plant that has blooms, you might want to consider the rose campion. The rose campion has these beautiful fuchsia blooms that bloom around Mother's Day each year, and they last for quite some time. And another plant that you might want to consider, which is a perennial, is a dusty miller. And it can add some dimension to your garden because it has these nice silvery leaves, and they are fuzzy as well. The bloom on it is probably not as pretty as some people would like, but the foliage is what attracts most people. And interesting enough, the deer also do not like the ornamental grasses. There are a wide variety of ornamental grasses to choose from. My favorite is this pink muley grass. Now, mine doesn't look quite that nice being close to the ocean, but it is a plant that does well in our area because the ornamental grasses are really great for areas that have a lot of sun and the wind and poor soils. So you might want to choose, some of the ornamental grasses. And if you have a shady area in your garden, instead of using the hosta, you might want to consider using ferns. The deer don't like ferns either, so there are a lot of varieties of ferns to choose from. So this has just been a sampling of some of the plants that the deer do not like, but hopefully you'll have a sense of what to look for when you are choosing plants.
Yes, well, good. So I've learned a variety of methods might be important. So fences, if that's a good option in your yard. Sometimes repellent, sometimes frightening, but plant selection seems to be key. Sounds like there are many choices.
There are a lot of choices, Sarah, and to help you along with that, we provide a handout that is very good, that gives you more information about your choices. It actually explains the plants that the deer really like, what we call our plant candy, the deer candy, and it also gives those plants that the deer do not particularly like. And if you have access to the internet, then you can just go to our website and download this publication.
Oh, great.
Now, if you don't have access to the internet, that's not to worry. Just give us a call. Call Dare County Extension at 473-4290 and let them know that you'd like to have the publication on deer. And we'll be more than happy to send that out to you because we want to be able to help you have a nice garden.
Thank you so much, Lois, for sharing your expertise with us. It's been a very interesting topic, and I have many good ideas to use when gardening in the coming years. It's been a pleasure meeting with you, and I'm glad we have certified master gardeners to help us with these kinds of topics.
Well, I'm so happy to be able to do that for you, Sarah, and hopefully this will help you have a beautiful garden in the future. Thank you for having me.